Good day. Today I have the privilege of being here with an old friend, colleague and partner, John Burgess. My name is Grant Newton. I've been in the healthcare industry for the best part of 25 years, working with clinicians, healthcare providers and caregivers. I've seen the demise of the system. I've seen how healthcare providers have been hurt over periods of time. Techno-stress, burnout, and not so recently, we've got COVID to deal with. We built the EQHI program. The EQ Health Institute has been developed for clinicians, and it takes the science of human behavior and it works through the science of human behavior to strengthen our clinicians. A strengthened clinician is an absolutely strengthened society. We're rebuilding the society. John, I have to tell you that it's an absolute privilege to be with you here today. It has been a long journey of nearly 2.5, 3 years where, John Burgess, you began writing your Higher Self-Living book. And at that time, I was seeing that there was just an absolute connection between helping caregivers, healthcare workers, clinicians across the spectrum to attach themselves to something that they haven't seen before. To give them the support that I see you giving so many people. But because healthcare workers stand alone most of the time, they're either in private practice or in government practice, they operate largely independently. They don't have what corporates and businesses have the ability to give their people. And yet, we count on healthcare workers to be the pillar of society, to make communities well. And for me, it was a sad realization that we're not doing anything for them. They're doing a lot for us. And how do we correct that? So John, as I say, it's a privilege to be here with you today. Your book, which is recently been launched, Higher Self-Living, is just extraordinary, and I really encourage anybody to pick that up and to spend a few nights in the bath reading it, because it had an impression on me that brought me into a space that started generating what the EQ Health Institute really is. And that is, how do we support clinicians across the globe through what has been a tumultuous time, not just COVID, but pre-COVID, and the evolution of what has become stress in their lives.
Absolutely, Grant, and fantastic being with you, and we go back many years, and it takes us back to Greece. And you flew across to be with me, needed to ask one or two questions on non-attachment. So you detoured to Greece, going to Liverpool, I remember doing your master's there, and said, I need to come and talk to you about what clinicians would actually ask us questions about. But the book wasn't written then, and COVID hadn't happened then.
Yeah, John, the inspiration for me was, and you challenged me about my own children. And I thought to myself, my world is interconnected. It's not just about my children. And you're saying, how can I be attached to my children? What happens if something happened to them? And I didn't like what you said, to be quite honest. And so you're right, I got on a plane and I said, John, I'm coming to you and we're going to sit down and I need to understand the philosophy of what you're building. And I have to say that that's what stemmed the philosophy of how we created EQHI Health Institute together. And it was really about, how do we think about what clinicians are going through? And as you rightly said, pre-COVID, I think it's important for us to reiterate that. What clinicians are going through on a day-to-day basis, because when we go into their surgery or we go into a hospital where we're seeing a nurse, we don't think about what's going on in their lives. We don't imagine that the impact of the social and the economic stresses and burnouts and family stress, which has affected all of our lives, it affects them too. So the transference of that into either not being the best who they could be in front of their patients, or building them up to what the EQHI Health Institute now does, building them up into being better clinicians and living in a world of not attachment, but deep compassion. And I think it was probably that word that when we were walking down the streets of Skiathos in Greece, and you helped me understand the difference between empathy and compassion. That was where the penny dropped. And I said, John, we can build something here that is going to change lives. Not just clinician lives, but patients' lives. People who are expectant on a daily basis for them to make them well.
Yeah, and I remember you, I think what it got to me was you said clinicians, and I'm in a correction here, have 17 minutes to be at their best in front of a client. And part of your legacy through your background was, I want to deliver them to be at their absolute best in front of their patient. And of course, you've alluded to now, in front of their patient, but it goes far deeper. Actually for themselves first, because it's all the inner work, really. And then it goes back to spouse, goes back to children, it goes back to the people working with you, it goes back to friends. And ultimately, and it should be, most probably it's a first, we're trying to do it in front of your patient. But effectively, we're saying it's got all the other stuff. You can't arrive to be your best in front of your patient unless you've done all the other work and continue to do so and be the real you. And I just know that was your legacy, and it just tied in. It was hand in glove of what we were both wanting to achieve there.
Absolutely right, John. You know, it was about, I reflected on the fact that clinicians continuously getting upskilling in clinical training, right? So there'll be courses that they go on that's the latest and cutting edge in medicine. But there was very little, if anything at all, about how do you be the best person you are? How do you become the bedside manner which invariably you want to be? And you're right, it's about, you know, helping people understand their own lives, helping people understand themselves intrinsically, helping to deal with their lives. And it's only then, and this is the exciting part, that the regulatory bodies and the clinician societies that we've been engaging with, the farmers, the insurers, all of them have come to the conclusion with us that says that clinicians living in their higher self, clinicians who are resilient, who have learnt about themselves through an Enneaworld or Enneagram type process, have got to be better clinicians. And so the end who's going to win is going to be the patient, let alone the family and the interaction with friends and their social environment, because that's what I go through now. You know, my learnings through exactly the same process that we're asking clinicians to go to, we went through. And it's a tough gig. It's something that I have to say, it's something that I have to wake up in the morning and take cognitive thinking through. And I have to go into meditation now, which I have to be honest, you know, I'm also a bit of a researcher and a scientist. And so meditation and that sort of thing for me historically was there, and I used to think I did it. But now my reflection is my meditation. It's about, how do I wake up today and become a better person? How do I live more in my higher self than in my lower self?
And that most probably goes on to one or two of the topics we might talk about just now, being Enneagram, stroke Enneaworld, and higher self. But most probably the most important question you will ever ask yourself every day, and if you did that every day of your life when you woke up, is ask one question: what is my state of being?
Yeah.
And generally, most people's state of being is more anxious and more stressed and more fearful, and being part of a victim and judging and so forth. So you generally will wake up there. Your big thing is, where have I woken up? So I worked out in the writing of the book, and I learned so much, and you talked to me about non-attachment, and we'll go back there, but three of the biggest things that I worked out for myself, or understood. I'd always been non-attachment, but didn't know how to articulate it until effectively you had actually come to Greece to ask me. And when you asked me that question, and you said, I love my children, and I'm attached to them, and I want to be attached to them. And I love my wife, and I'm attached to her, and I want to be. Why is it wrong? And I said to you, gee, let me think about it. We spent 3 or 4 hours talking about many things. I'll come back to you tomorrow morning. Thought about it, and then came back to you and said, I want to ask you one question. Can you love more, ever, by being attached?
Yeah.
And you said, you know something? I actually worked it out for myself last night. And I said, okay, so we don't need to go further in that. Because if you ever, and I'm just using this is one very small part of being attached, but if you ever think that you love by being attached. It says, not really. It's more, I want to own. I am clingy. I am fearful of anything ever happening to you. Everything's from lower self. The higher self of non-attachment says, I just love.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do. I want to bring that part. I don't want to bring all my other fears and everything else into that kind of thing.
So John, talking about love, right? And that's something you taught me, and I have to say, not, I think, dissimilar to how clinicians will view this initially, right? They'll say, oh, this is a bit esoteric. You know, John Grant, I don't know if this is going to work for us, right? Because we're dealing with scientists. Whilst they're humans and loving and caregivers, we're still intrinsically dealing with a science element because they've gone through either 7 or 12 years of medical school, and it's all been science. So the question around love, which you taught me, was initiated by me understanding who I am, because understanding who you are initiates the ability to love. You know, because if you love yourself, I know that's the old adage, a bit cliche in itself, but when you actually live it and you learn it, you realize you've got to love yourself. Now, I didn't know who I was. And one of the key attributes of the EQHI program is the Enneagram. And the Enneagram, it is the gate into the program. And I learned through the Enneagram who I was. And it was through that learning that I started to be able to understand that if clinicians potentially started understanding who they were, they started loving themselves, they started caring about themselves as much as they're caring, if not more, about patients that they're seeing on a daily basis. And that doesn't put family and social and everybody else that is supporting that clinician aside, because we hope one day, in fact, that they're going to go through the Enneagram and they're going to learn about loving themselves, so the cohesiveness of bringing this together is real. But John, help us understand how the Enneagram itself, as a vital tool in the EQHI program, lends itself to help people learn how to love themselves, how to understand how they interact.
So as part of your legacy was totally focused on ensuring that clinicians arrived always, hopefully, and so one never gets to higher self, by the way. One has a continual journey until they die. And you will never have arrived. When you say I've arrived, you haven't. And every day we have the work to get ourselves back. The simple thing is that if I go inner, I can get myself back. I am actually in control of that. So as you're talking about then Enneagram, you're born, all of us are born. And that's, I focused more on the Ennea world here to bring it to us, and naturally which you're involved in that we're all born, our nature, love, compassion and kindness. That's what we're born. That's oneness. It's who we are. And then, as Jung did and said, is we start developing an ego and its separateness. And we start developing this ego that protects us. It's our own stuff. It's by our own design. It makes us feel important. It defends us. So what the Enneagram does is it takes us all the way back to who we really were and are and the beauty of us. So when I was talking to the people about I want to go to the more positive side of the Enneagram, the spiritual side. The spiritual side and the soul says, I am love. I just love. I don't need to be loved. My niece had said to me, I love to be loved. And I said, wrong, lower self.
It's a need, right? It's a
need
response.
It says, because then you're going to get let down, this expectation. I said, just be love. Just be love, and you will be loved. In fact, it's just that simple.
John, I've reflected deeply on the Enneagram. And one of the things that came out was, forgive the science term, the axiology of it. It's the value system that is associated with it. And what came out very calmly but clearly was the gifts, right? So what have I been gifted with in knowing myself? What is the value that I'm actually adding to society and to my family and to my social structures? So when I think about a clinician going through the Enneagram, for me critically, they've taken up a vocation. I mean, they really have taken up something that I have to say sometimes I think about it carefully and think, what have they done? Because all they're doing is they're just giving and giving and giving, and are they actually receiving? But then it says to me, but it's a gift that they've been given. And that gift is something that transfers, and it's a value system. Take us perhaps, John, into what gifts are. What is that value?
So, and I'm going to answer it first. A lot of caregivers might be a 2 Enneagram type, which says, I'm a helpful giver, I love to give. And in fact, what we're wanting to take the people into is the highest form of giving, because it is beautiful to give, and it's beautiful that each one of the 9, so there's 9 different personality types first in an Enneagram. Each one exactly equal, all beautiful, at the top end, and then it shows you all the trapdoors and the fears that you have, and that you have at that lower part. I've been immersed in it for 15 years, but as I was saying to the guys, I want to talk about the gifts more than the trapdoors and the fears. They said, but that's where everybody spends their time. It's aspirational to get there, and that's when I brought it back before. It's not aspirational. We all have it. We are all love, compassion, and kindness. We just got to unlock and unpeel all the layers that take us back to find it, because we become a separate self from that perspective. But to take it into the 2, because I think you would find most probably healthcare givers, at least 40% of them, 40-50%, might have been a 2, because others would get involved differently. And then as they're giving, their downside, their trapdoor, is that they need to be acknowledged. They lose themselves in it. They're looking for recognition, and they will be what other people want them to be partly, and they get let down. The greatest form is the altruistic 2, which actually says, I give because I am love, because I want to, because that's where I serve the most. So from my perspective, what I'd understood, if I only did one thing, happened that we wrote the book, Higher Self-Living. But if I only did one thing, your legacy was take that to the clinicians, because that's what drives you, and everybody has a different. Mine was, how do I get Enneagram, Enneaworld to the world? Because if every single person understood their gifts, and therefore we've made the Enneaworld more positive, where most of the Enneagram, absolutely correctly so, because most of the people are in lower self, spend their time telling you what is wrong with you. We're more saying, what is your gift? But we will tell you, because the only way you will learn is to understand some of the negatives that block you, your primal fears that actually block you, you're getting there. So I knew that if I could do that, give everybody, allow them, because it's nearly like chess versus drafts. It is so deep, there's so much to be written about. It goes back 2,000 years and 4,000 years. It is so, and I'm going to use the word eerily accurate about oneself. So the more you've gone on your inner journey, and you only do that, if only that was the beginning of your inner journey, then I've unlocked everything. And then, and the second most important, is to honor everybody else, that they might see the world differently through one of, you might be an Enneagram style, 7, 5, doesn't matter. So all 5, nothing is better or worse, but effectively we've got to honor the other people, that they have a different movie of the world, that they see the world slightly differently. And if we honor them that, then that improves everybody, even whoever there's some people who won't acknowledge, won't be grateful, will talk too much, will disappear, but you will know that through the work on yourself.
John, we've now learned through the Enneagram that it's not wrong to be in any Enneagram style, right? Whilst you said, and I remember you saying in our discussion on Ennea, that most probably, if you're a caregiver, you may end up in a 2. But you shouldn't be fearful of being a 9. In fact, it may even be advantageous. So don't steer away from being a 9 if in essence a 9 is going to serve you. Surgeons are different to psychologists. They're going to be different people. So, but one of the things that, and if I go back to that journey that I took to you and the absolute almost cathartic moments that we had on Skiathos Island, it was all about how do we move from knowing who we are into the journey of getting to your higher self. And I'm reflecting again on that non-attachment and attachment, on the difference between empathy and compassion. What does EQHI teach us through going through that journey, particularly the module on higher self, that sets us up with tools and structures and thinking that allows us to start that journey?
I'm going to go right back into compassion and higher self, but I'm going to finish off just on the Enneagram from your perspective. It is absolutely all our work to become the best part of whatever number we are, and then to try to integrate, which is higher self, to the best of every single one of the other numbers. And as you get to the top end of that, that is oneness, and then you're able to access the best of everything. So our ultimate objective in higher self, which that's why it's so related to the Enneagram, is to take ourselves to that highest form of being, which is serving, and again love, and again compassion. And so when we're in all of that, we can do anything and be anything, and that's where we want to play. Well, we don't want to disintegrate to the lowest part, so that's where we come back to it. And so to get back to higher self, so the question really is, what is higher self living? And part of that would be, and I think if I was going to describe one word, wholeness says it's to be undamaged and unbroken in the midst of everything happening around you that is destructive, but it doesn't matter. So it's not kind of trying to attain happiness. It's trying to attain wholeness, and therefore you get inner peace.
Right. And John, there are other modules in the EQHI program which include personal mastery and resilience and social ethics, and all of those play in to support structures of taking you on the journey of higher self. Am I correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. But everything is always inner work, and I think I was saying to you the other day, if I just take the one concept, it's a simple concept that we have, that we will teach, that it's over there, but it's the 1/8, 7/8 concept. So the 1/8 says, don't worry about the event. There is nothing that's worse. The event will only be 1/8 ever. 7/8 is how we deal with it. The converse, because people would say, whoa, 1/8, it's only 1/8 if your child dies. Always understand, if it was 7/8 was the event, and 1/8 was, we can do all the work but can't really change it, we'd be dead scared of any event. But in higher self, we actually provide the resilience, because that comes back to personal mastery, effectively of saying. So it's a simple thing. Comes back to compassion and empathy and non-attachment that you were talking about. And I would think that, and you understand that totally, is most doctors, to protect themselves intuitively, have actually said, without even really understanding, I've got to become more non-attached. But effectively, you could do it so well that you'd be non-attached but not with compassion.
Yeah.
And so the big thing is, we've got to be non-attached. And we've got to continue to build compassion. That is higher self living from that perspective. And so I wanted to just answer something between compassion and empathy for you, just from that perspective, is, and I understood this in writing the book, I then understood the real difference, because the Tao, the Bhagavad Gita, reading anything of ancient wisdom always said compassion is so high. Empathy is always high, but it can destroy you. So that's why none of the old teachings talk about empathy. It says, I would just become a basket case. And so compassion is, I feel for you, and empathy is, I feel with you. And what we've got to do is say, empathy doesn't really work all the time. Sometimes it's really good. It's better than sympathy. But compassion is I feel for you. Then you can feel for anybody, and you've got to feel. So non-attachment is not about an indifference. It's absolutely just saying, I just won't take on that because it happens all around me. I've got to protect myself.
EQHI is dealing with the science of human behavior, and particularly in how we build clinicians. Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate this time.
Great being with you, Grant.